Hello, welcome back. In this video, I will be going through the example for activities-based costing. And there are 3 steps, so we will go through these 3 steps. Please make sure you go back and do the reading if you haven't already, and you can download the same spreadsheet and go through that. So step 1 is to research and define the activities and the cost drivers. So in this example, we're still using the potato preparation department. And what we're saying is that there are 4 major activities that that department does. So receiving and unloading the potatoes, the batch setup, washing and peeling, crushing and blending, and then we have this kind of catch-all other. And then we all identify the cost driver of each of these activities. So in this one, we're saying labor hours. So for this example, we're saying that people actually receive and unload the potatoes, and therefore labor hours, it makes sense to be a cost driver. For batch setup, we have setup hours, so the time it takes to set up that department in between runs. And then we have washing and peeling, machine hours, and then crushing and blending machine hours. So what I'm suggesting here is that there's a machine that does the washing and the peeling, and then there's a different machine that does the crushing and the blending, and the amount of hours run for each one would drive the cost of that activity. And then if there's any cost in the department that don't fall into these 4 major buckets, we'll put them into this other category. It's kind of a catch-all for all of the kind of miscellaneous random costs that don't fit into these nicely. And we'll just divide that by the number of batches of potatoes that we produce. So these costs will be evenly distributed excuse me, amongst all the pounds of potatoes. So that's the first step, to identify the different activities in your department and their associated cost drivers, what drives those. And in real life, you could do this for any department, and you could get it as narrow as you want. Maybe there's 2 or 3 or 4 other pieces to this process that you could put in here and still have other at the bottom, or you could narrow it down or widen it out so you're only looking at 1 or 2 things. That's up to management and how complicated or complex you want the process to be. So then we'll move on to step 2. In this step, we're going to allocate the overhead costs to these activities and then calculate the cost driver rates. So what we're saying here in this example is that receiving and loading the potatoes, we've decided after doing research and calculations and interviewing people and talking and looking at the process, is that it costs $20,000. And it takes 500 labor hours. So then we just simply divide 20,000 by 500 to get $40 per labor hour is what it costs us to receive and unload potatoes. So we do the exact same thing for all of these. So for instance, crushing and blending is $60,000, and it takes 300 machine hours to do that. So every hour that machine runs, it's costing us $200. And finally, the other column, we just throw everything that doesn't fit into these, as I mentioned in the last step, in here. We had about $10,000 left over, and we're saying that we ran 134 batches of 1,000-pound batches of potatoes. So that comes out to $75 for every 1,000 pounds that we're producing. And in the end, we have to account for all of the overhead costs for that department for the period. So the $130,000 would be all the cost, and it would be accounted for in all these 5 buckets. So that's what we're doing in step 2, is calculating these cost driver rates. And we'll use those in the next step, as this once again builds upon, each step builds on the one prior to it. So in step 3, what we're going to do here is we're going to look at the July activity, those rates we just calculated, and then how much overhead will be assigned. So in this example, what we're saying is that we use both sweet potatoes and regular potatoes in our process. and that the regular potatoes take a little longer to prepare just because of the way the potatoes are. So what we've got here is we're saying that these potatoes take 110 machine hours to wash and peel versus 90, and 160 machine hours versus 140 for the crushing and blending. What I've done is I've put everything else here exactly the same as far as labor hours and setup hours, and the other is the same. So we've only changed the number of hours for these two things so we can see what happens. So you then take those actual activities for the month of July and you multiply it by the rates that we calculated in step 2. And that gives you the actual total amount of overhead that will be assigned to these 5 steps, these 5 activities for the month of July. And if you note, both of these combined equaled the $130,000 of total overhead that we needed to allocate. If you also note, because the machine hours are different here, we've got a cost per unit, or a cost per pound, if you will, of $1.03 for the regular potatoes, but only 91 cents for the sweet potatoes. And that's because they take a little bit longer. If I drop this down to, say, 50 hours, let's say we somehow improve the process and it only takes 50 hours now to wash and peel regular potatoes, we see this drops right down to 87 cents. So this is what activity-based costing does for you. Instead of just having one predetermined overhead rate for this department that would go by, say, hours for all the potatoes, we're breaking it down between the 2 different kinds of potatoes, and we get a more accurate cost. In this example, $1.03 for regular and 91 cents for sweet. If we only had the one rate that we used, the cost for both would calculate out to be exactly the same, and we wouldn't know that the regular potatoes cost more. So that's what activities-based costing can do for you. It gives you additional information to help management make better decisions.